Hi, my name is Josh Stroshine, and I'm going to be presenting today on Burp Intruder. But before we get started, we have to take a step back and look at and actually talk about the Burp Suite, which Burp Intruder is a part of the Burp Suite. What the Burp Suite is an integrated platform for testing the security of web applications. The power of this application suite is its mixture of manual and automated testing components and testing modes. Some of the key components in this suite is an intercepting proxy, a spider, a scanner, intruder, repeater, sequencer, and then the fact that it's extensible. You can customize the functionality of it. As you can see with these key components, we're going to see how this kind of matches up in the actual tool itself and in some of the tabs that we'll look at here later on in this presentation. Just to note, this was created by the authors of WA, and if you look on page 82, there's a different introductory demo of how to use Burp Intruder. So if you wanted to kind of get a different perspective on it, that's a good place to look. So now we can take a look at Burp Intruder. Burp Intruder is a tool for automating customized attacks against web applications. What this tool is commonly used for is testing for flaws such as SQL injection, cross-site scripting, buffer overflows, path traversal, brute force against authentication schemes, which is what I'm going to cover today, enumeration, hidden content, and a couple others. You can reference WA Chapter 13 for an in-depth discussion of those different flaws. Before we go into the demo and start looking at the actual tool, I want to talk quick about the attack types that are available through Intruder. That's sniper, battering ram, pitchfork, and cluster bomb. To start with, now with all these different attacks, I'm going to talk about a couple different things, positions and payloads. And a position is just simply where we're going to inject a payload, and the payload is what malicious code we want to send to the application. And it'll make a lot more sense when we start looking at the demo of the tool. So for the sniper, what this attack type does is a single set of payloads. It targets each position in turn and inserts each payload in turn. For the battering ram, this is a single set of payloads. It iterates through those payloads and inserts the same payload into all the defined positions at once. For the pitchfork, this uses multiple payload sets for each position. So the best way to think about this one is if I have a position 1 and position 2, when I run an attack, the first attack is for position 1, it's going to get payload 1 from the payload set 1. And then for position 2, we'll get position 1 from the payload set 2. And then finally a cluster bomb, which is what I'm going to use today in this demo. And this is going to be multiple payload sets for all positions. So you're basically going to get every permutation of positions and payload sets that you have configured. Before we begin though, where do you download it? You can go to portswigger.net/burp and get the application. So, assuming that you've already been there, when you download the application, you'll get a zip file. I just extracted that to my desktop. If you go ahead and open that up, you'll get 3 files inside, a batch file, a jar file, and then a README. Double-clicking on the jar file will actually launch Burp. And just to help keep things clear, I'm going to dismiss that. Here's just your default when you open up Burp. This is the screen you see. Just to get a general a little bit of familiarization with the layout, you've got a pretty standard file menu here. Then you've got a row of tabs, and you'll see that these tabs coincide to those key components that we talked about earlier. And then right below this first row of tabs, and you can kind of think of these as the parent tabs. These really don't change at all. I don't think they change at all. If they do, they don't change much during your normal use of Burp. Below that though is more what I would consider the child tabs, and those are going to change based off of what parent tab you have selected. So you can see if I'm on the target tab right now, I have sitemap and scope. Let's say I go to intruder though, and I have a different set of tabs. So just some of the way the GUI works as you're working through this tool. Now that this application is open, one of the things you got to try to figure out is it listening as a proxy. So if you go to the proxy tab, you'll see your first tab below is the intercept tab, and intercept is on right now. What this means is that once you configure your browser to use Burp Suite, every request your browser generates is going to get intercepted. So it's going to stop it. There's going to be probably a red flashing. This tab's going to flash red, and you're going to either have the option to forward, drop, or maybe take some action on it, modify the request headers, do whatever you want with it. We're not looking for that functionality right now, so I'm going to go ahead and disable that. The next tab is your options tab, and here you can see that we have our proxy listeners. Now this one's not running. Typically when you open this up, it's running by default, so you'll have a checkbox right there. I'm sure just in my previous tests that I ran with this, I just had something, the configuration a little bit out of whack. So you see now that it's running, it's listening on port 8080 and loop back only. So we know that the IP address that we can configure in our browser will be 127.0.0.1. So next step, I'm just going to get us set up here and get back on the target tab. Our next step is to get our browser configured. So my browser of choice is Firefox. Your configuration will vary a little bit different in each browser, but it's going to be a similar in that I'm going to the options of the browser. I'm trying to find network settings, connection settings, and then looking at that. So you can see I've already got my browser. Typically when I run at home, I don't have a proxy at all. But here you can see I've already got it configured. So it's an HTTP proxy on 127.0.0.1 and port 8080. And then I go ahead and check this use proxy server for all protocols. So if I do anything over SSL, FTP socks, SSL is really the only one I've ever really cared about so far. And I'm not going to get into too much detail. There's some discussion that would have to go into with certificates and things. So once I got that set up, click OK, and now Burp is ready, or my browser is now ready to use Burp. So one other note here, I have what's called DAM vulnerable web application set up. It's running on a virtual machine just on my local network. And since it's a vulnerable application, it's a good target to use for this demo. I haven't made any requests yet. You can see that the target tab is still empty. So I'm just going to go ahead and refresh this page. Once I do that, we'll start seeing now every request that just generated from my browser is going to show up in this sitemap. And as you expand these, you can see here, if we go back to my browser, there's the IP and there is a directory. So I've got this application actually installed one directory below the web root, and we can see that here. And so what this will do is it'll start to build a hierarchy, or basically a sitemap, a copy of the website as I browse it. It's all passive at this point. So to get into DVWA, as you can about imagine, admin and password will get you logged in. For those familiar with WebGoat, somewhat similar. It has different exercises that you can go through in order to kind of hone your skills. I'm going to disregard pretty much everything about this except brute force. That's the only one I really care about at this point in time. So we've got the page up, and we can go back, or if we just real quick look at the directory structure, it's DVWA vulnerabilities brute. If we go back to our target tab in Burp, we can see DVWA, vulnerabilities, and brute. So here we go, we can see there's the different requests I've made, and that would make sense. I've only made one request for that page. So now the focus on my demo is going to be just brute forcing this login. So any other vulnerabilities that come up, you'll have to ignore them for now. What I want to focus on is just sending username and passwords and trying to brute force this login. So just to see what happens when we do that, I'm just going to use my name and the word password and click login. A couple of key things pop up here. One is that, again, just disregard that everything's in plain text in the query string. So the method for this form is obviously a get method. Here is our username and password that we just typed, and also we get an error response. So with that information, I can go back to my target tab and look at the different requests. Now I can see that there's that request that has the username and password in it, and what Burp does is it highlights different, puts a checkbox in the requests that have parameters, so something that you can tamper with. It just helps it, makes it a little bit easier to filter those out. So I can see here, this is the URL that I'm interested in. Now, why I went through the target tab is because the integration between that target tab and the intruder is very nice. Once I have a URL that I think is vulnerable, one that I want to start testing with, I just come into this tab, I can right click on it and send to intruder. What happens is the autofocus, it doesn't automatically focus to that tab. It highlights it red. It means that, hey, your focus is on a different tab, but I've sent something to this tab, so I'll go there. Once you go to the intruder tab, you'll have a couple of tabs below that. Again, when you open up Burp, you get this default tab. Under the File menu, you have Intruder Options. You can delete tab. I'm just going to go ahead and do that just to keep this a little bit cleaner. Now that I have the one tab, or the attack that I'm going to set up based off of that URL that I sent from my target tab, you can see the first tab underneath that is the target. So this is where I define the host and the port. Really nothing I need to do here because that's all pre-configured. This next tab is really where the integration becomes nice, because this is the positions tab, and what happened here was all of the request headers basically got sent over to this tab and pre-populated. Now Burp took it one step further and it identified positions that it thinks we can tamper, and it did them all. In this case, I don't necessarily want all of those, and you can see their positions because they're highlighted in red, and they've got these special characters that open and close whatever's in between it. And you don't need anything. It doesn't have to be the original value here. It can be anything you want. It just denotes by putting these special characters that it's a position. So if I take those out, it'll just go back, and this is the value that will get submitted with my request when I start this attack. So focusing on the ones I care about, username and password, and this last login I'm not going to care about. Now, right above that is the attack type, and as I talked about, we want a cluster bomb. And so what that's going to do, I'm going to set up 2 payload sets for username and password, and it's going to try each combination on both positions. So moving to the next tab, which is my payloads tab, as I would expect, for payload sets I have 2, and then you have a list of options here. There's quite a few options, but for the sake of time, I'm going to just focus on a preset list. So for position 1, which was my username tab, and it just comes in order, so the first one up becomes position 1, position 2, and so on. I'm going to just start adding in different payloads by using this text box and the add button down here. Josh user and maybe admin. And now payload 2, which I know is my password. I'll just put in some common passwords, such as QWERTY, ABC123, and password. Alright, I've got two payload sets set up now. Usernames, passwords. The last tab is options. I'm not going to look at anything at this right now. Timing, there are some timing things you can configure, some different results, and how your attacks are processed, and then this grep feature, which I'm going to cover here in just a minute. So once everything's set up, you go back up to the File menu and click Start Attack. You get a little pop-up that says, hey, this is a demo version, and so there's some restricted functionality, limited functionality, and that's fine. Now we've got the attack underway. Another dialog or another window opens up, and the attack starts. You're always going to get this 0 baseline request here, and then once that one finishes, then it's just going to start enumerating. And as you can see, because of that cluster bomb, I'm using from payload 2, I'm using every possible position from payload 1. So there'll be 9 possible combinations. If you look down at the bottom here, you see there's 7 of 9. So it's giving you calculates how many attacks it's going to try, and then gives you a progress of where it's at. Now, first glance, you might not see how there was any difference. Some of it is going to depend. It's going to depend largely on how the website operates. Does it log in and redirect? Does it log in and show error messages? What does it do? For this particular example, we know that it's just going to log in. Well, I know, and I'll show you in a second. It's going to log in and just show us, hey, welcome to the store. But if we look at the length, we can see that all of these have been the same except for this last one. So that means something was different on this one. Now we know it's admin and password, so if we go back here and try admin and password and log in, we'll get a welcome message. So this is what was different in the response. So now if I close this, go back to Burp Intruder, go to that options tab, and go to the grep, what this does is it's just going to allow me to clear these first. It's going to allow me to add in a simple pattern match or a regular expression match and it'll compare that to the response body, and then if that particular attack or that particular request has that in it, then it'll show us in a different way. It'll help us to filter these results. So I pasted that into that text box. I click add. Now if I run my attack again, and this may time out. What you'll see here, I may run out of time for the YouTube 15-minute time limit here, is that here's a column with what that pattern I wanted to match. Once I get a result, a checkbox will be there, and that'll just help me to filter my results. So hope you